Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the TCLF One-on-One Series. Through the One-on-One Series, we aim to interact with the best legal professionals from India and around the world. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the transactional side of the law, and we'll try to cover the journey of a transaction, the role of a lawyer in a transaction, and some of the burning issues which are being talked about in today's corporate law, such as SPACs and the regulatory challenges they face, the unprecedented number of deals that happened in 2021, and much more. We're honored to have Mr. Akshay Pathak as our guest for today's episode. Sir is currently working as a senior associate at Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, which is one of the top tier law firms of the country. He has extensive experience in advising clients on domestic as well as cross-border M&A transactions, as well as advisory work with respect to general corporate matters. Sir, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Hi, thank you, Shashwat.
Sir, we would like to start this conversation by talking about your journey as a lawyer. What inspired you to become a lawyer at the first place?
Shashwat, being very honest, I'm a first generation lawyer. So it's not as if law came very naturally to me. And no one from my family has practiced law. Per se, my grandfather had done law, but he never
Right.
practiced it. Maybe out of interest he did it, but he never practiced law. So from that perspective, I was a first generation lawyer. And then since your question is more about how I became a lawyer, so answering that, I would say that, see, we all remember reading history and civics in school, right?
Right, sir.
So civics was something I was always intrigued about, how basically the governance of our country functions. So
Right.
maybe I won't say that that was the only reason why I became a lawyer, but that was something which always intrigued me. And as I
Right, sir.
started, like for example, when I completed my 10th, when I was in 11th and 12th, I had obviously I had done commerce. Okay, I wasn't a science student. From that perspective, obviously law was a very lucrative career option back then. Also, it is right now also. And what I understood about myself in course of my journey as a student in school also, that I am not someone who can just do a desk job, right? Who can just
Right, sir.
sit and work. Though that's a
Right.
different thing. You may say that as a corporate lawyer also, it's not as if you're arguing in courts, but you would understand and you would appreciate the fact that role of a lawyer these days is not of a just of a rock-clad barrister who would wear a gown and argue in a court of law, right? So from that
Right, sir.
perspective, when I was in school also, from the beginning itself, I was into sort of debates. I used to enjoy speaking. And when you are in your school, you're always fascinated by something which you are good at, and you just want to make the most out of it, correct? So from that point of view, I was always intrigued by law as a profession, because I used to always think that as a lawyer, this was the fundamental thing which I had understood, that as a lawyer, you, if you are good, if you have that gift of gab, you can excel. Even though I think that is, now I understand that that was a very premature thought of deciding whether I want to do law or not. But yes, being very honest with you, back then when I was in school, that was one of my motivating factors. Number one, that I will get to speak a lot, and number two,
Right, sir.
I felt that at least I am good at this, I can do well. So back then, and adding on to the fact that I was always intrigued about our judicial system and how our country functions, being such a large country with uh, so much diversity. So I used to be intrigued about this fact, and what good way to understand and study law. So that's how I ended up becoming a lawyer.
That's a very interesting answer, sir, to this question. And I think remembering my school days, civics was one of the subjects that I was also very intrigued in. And I think when I picked out humanities and I further, studied civics and then legal studies was introduced as a subject, it just solidified my interest, into the legal profession. And I think your description about the role of a lawyer now transforming from a mere legal advisor to, I think, a business
Yeah,
advisor.
so this is the,
To,
I would just want to add one point here. So what I am seeing, like what I have seen from, even though I understand that the scale of knowledge or the kind of exposure of law students now is much more than what it used to be when I was a law student. Right. I started doing my law in 2011. I graduated in 2016. Right. So just imagine, it has been all a decade when I was in my, if you see the time span, almost 10 years, almost it has been 10 years. Right. So
Right, sir.
from that perspective, the exposure is much more. But what I have witnessed so far, whenever I get to interact with especially first or second year students, is that their understanding of role of a lawyer, of a in-house counsel, or of a person who's working in a corporate team or in a litigation team, is like, sorry, I'm
Right, sir.
digressing from your question, but I thought that this
No,
is
no, sir.
something which is very important, which I feel that this is something which should be discussed and should be
Correct.
brought in front of students, is that once you have graduated, it's not as if there are only two things which you can do: either join a litigator's chamber, or let's say join a law firm. Right, there are
Right.
multiple avenues available, and the lack of I would say, I won't say that the lack of exposure, but maybe people don't talk about it. Like especially in those non-NLUs, like obviously if you're graduating from a national law school, you have a circle of seniors, or you have your peer group who know someone who are working in a firm, or who are working with a litigator. You have a good alumni base who can at least, like,
Right, sir.
basically these things are being talked about. But especially from a, since I'm pointing out, I'm not from a national law school per se, right?
Correct.
So from that perspective, what I have seen is, especially when you're in your initial years of law school, you don't even have such kind of exposure which will at least explain it to you, and you don't even have a clarity which will help you to understand the difference of a like, let's say you want to do litigation. You have decided in your initial years. I have seen students who don't even have the clarity that what is the role of a law firm person
Right, sir.
doing litigation, or sort of working in a litigation team, as opposed to someone who's doing independent practice as a, and vis-a-vis someone who's working under someone. So this clarity is
Right, sir.
not there, and maybe
Right,
I
sir.
was fortunate enough to have that clarity. Maybe I was in
Right,
in
sir.
in, in that circle of people who were, and I was lucky to have that kind of guidance. But that is something which is
Right, sir.
missing. So to
Correct,
everyone
sir.
who's a law who has just joined the profession, or who's about to graduate, and who still doesn't have this clarity, it is always good to reach out to whoever you can.
Right, sir.
It's much better than, like, basically rather than just jumping into the ocean without knowing how to swim, and thinking that you will eventually figure it out. It's always better to try and talk to people who have done it. Right, at least you'll
Right.
know what you are getting into. So this is very important, very critical. And you
Right,
might
sir.
be very good, you might have excellent speaking skills, you might have but and eventually you will find your way out. Even if you, let's say, you wanted to do something, you ended up something doing else, but if you are good, you are hardworking, you will find your way. But the initial phase, at least though those 4 5 years, you will miss out on capitalizing on that, and you will just waste your time. So that can be avoided.
Correct,
And
sir.
sometimes I also feel that, especially in the first 2 years, even though I was very fortunate, I was in touch with people who could guide me. But especially in those 1 or 2 years, wherein I felt that I cannot do anything, right? I can just intern in NGOs, and this is something which can be sort of told that, look, there are 10 other things which you can do in your initial years. This is the roadmap. This is the
Right, sir.
roadmap. This is how your journey should be. So this is,
Right, sir.
I thought this is very important. So I just thought I'll shed some light on this.
No, sir, I absolutely agree with that. And I think if the clarity is there, and if we know how to differentiate between the roles, and if we know what we want to pursue and the path that we need to take up, I think what happens is that it doesn't matter where we start, we're eventually going to reach a better place, and eventually, become successful because the clarity is always there. So I think that's very important. Now, sir, you've described why you joined the profession itself. Now, my question is towards your focus area, that is corporate law and cross border as well as domestic transactions. So, sir, what was it about the transactional side of the law if I should say so, that attracted you the most, and why did you, then venture out into the field of transactions?
Yeah. So to answer this question, it is just the scale of transactions, at the scale at which these transactions are done, which I have always, as a law student also, I was fantasized back then also. The
Right.
you hear about these IPOs, but IPOs is something which even a non-lawyer always is interested in, or if someone
Mhm.
is an investor, as a retail investor, you might be interested in, right? You would have read
Right,
about,
sir.
even though you have not started. I don't think you've started working, right? You're still
No, sir, I'm in a final year.
yeah,
Yeah,
in your final year. Yeah, yeah. I remember that
right.
discussion. So, but I'm sure you would have read about these Nika IPO or
Correct, sir.
Kalyan Brothers
Paytm
IPO.
IPO.
Right. Exactly,
Right, sir.
exactly. And then how the market crashed, so and so forth.
Right.
So, uh, as I said, that I was always intrigued about how our governance structure works. Similarly, I was not someone who was not reading up back then. Even in
Right, sir.
my school days, I used to read up. I used to read about, even though, but being very honest with you, back then I didn't want to be a transactional lawyer per se.
Okay,
I
sir.
but yes, as opposed to someone who never understood the difference, like a
Right, sir.
first year student, I have seen cases wherein they don't understand that what does a corporate lawyer do,
Right, sir.
right? What does a litigation lawyer do? So if you read up, if you are reading up, then you'll at least get to know that, look, yes, this is a XYZ transaction, right?
Right, sir.
And if you try to research on it, if you're and obviously you'll do it only if it interests you. If you find it boring, you
Right,
will
sir.
never do that. But back then also,
Right, sir.
when I was in my first year, when I was in my second year, I had not even started interning. So when
Right,
I
sir.
read about these transactions, the scale at which they are done, I understood that, look, if you see a big transaction, it is not just about Companies Act. As a
Right,
law
sir.
student, when you in the initial years, I think, and maybe it was just about me, and maybe other students have better exposure and they are more their uh, horizon of understanding is better. It could be
Right, sir.
possible, but I'll be honest with you, when I was in my second year, all I knew about corporate law was Companies Act. Like, there's this law, Companies Act,
Right, sir.
this
Right,
is
sir.
what it is, and everything about what a corporate lawyer must be doing would be somewhere or
Right,
the
sir.
other related with companies law, right?
Right, sir.
But then I understood when I started reading about these transactions that it is, if you see a transaction, the scale at which, and especially if it's a cross border deal, any type of deal, it's not just about Companies Act. It's just one part of it. There's a
Right, sir.
taxation angle to it. There is an exchange regulation angle to it, right?
Right, sir.
And since in the beginning you mentioned that you want to talk about SPAC, then there's a
Right, sir.
cap marks angle to it, right? So it's
Right,
not
sir.
not very straightforward. So that is
Right,
something
sir.
which intrigued me, and it's not. And again, just to clarify, when I started practicing law in a corporate team, I had no intentions of, when I just started. You're very new. You want to experiment
Right, sir.
everything, and that's how I was. I was not clear that I wanted to look in a corporate team also. I just want to do transactions. I
Right,
don't
sir.
think that would be correct also. If you've started
Right, sir.
working in a team, you should see that where your interest lies. It's not as if,
Correct.
even though being a transactional lawyer, doing M&A, you being a corporate lawyer, maybe for a fourth year student, fifth year student, it may sound very fancy, but it's not how it is. Uh, if you are just doing hardcore corporate advisory also, there's nothing
Right, sir.
wrong with it, and it's a very like niche practice area. If you see, I have colleagues who are just doing corporate advisory, and
Right, sir.
if you talk to them, the kind of knowledge base they have over exchange laws, over TMT laws, tech laws, I may not be having that kind of experience, or that
Right,
kind of
sir.
exposure, right? And
Right,
they have
sir.
hardcore, they're doing just corporate advisory, right?
Correct.
So from that perspective, though there would be people who would say that no, you in long run, it's better if you're a transactional lawyer, you may do well, because you'll be seeing, you'll be part of those big deals. Having said that, but at the end of the day, it's about two things. Number two, your professional growth, and number two, your personal
Right.
satisfaction, right? So for,
Correct,
to
sir.
answer again, sorry, I digress a lot. coming back to your
No, sir.
question, that how I ventured into the field of law and ended up becoming a corporate lawyer, to answer it in pointers. Number one, I just started into general corporate, right? And
Correct, sir.
eventually I sort of it maybe it was because of the fact that my team was doing a lot of hardcore M&A transactions back then when I was a fairly junior also, or for
Right, sir.
reason, I started enjoying the kind of work which was flowing in. Even though
Right, sir.
back then it used to be very like basically tormenting in the beginning. It was like
Right, sir.
everything I was doing as a A0, something which
Mhm.
I was reading for the first time. Everything,
Right,
every other day, every new day, something I was reading, I had never seen it in my life.
right, sir.
Obviously, it still happens. Like
Right,
50%
sir.
of not that I have been working for 10 years, right? And in fact,
Right, sir.
even if someone working for 10 years, every third or fourth day, that person is dealing with new facts, new analysis, new laws, right?
Right, sir.
New, like there could be 10 ways in which a transaction can be structured. There could be n number of ways wherein a clause can be structured, right?
Correct,
So
sir.
in the beginning everything used to be new, and it still a lot of times it is new only. But the fact that you get to number one, draft.
Right, sir.
Number two, you can present your views, you have to be analytical. And
Right,
number three, that obviously you get to be a part of these big deals, which is,
right,
this is
sir.
a smaller reason. This was my main sort of motivation, and I ended up doing more of transactions and less of advisory, but we still do a lot of advisory work also. And it's always good to, because see, if you do transactions, obviously you'll have to analyze, read up on a lot of laws, be it foreign exchange laws or
Right,
Indian
sir.
laws also. Those are ever changing. But if you're doing hardcore corporate advisory, research, a lot of research, a lot of analyzing, interplay of different laws is something which is
Correct,
very
sir.
interesting, very fascinating, and it is
Correct,
very
sir.
laborious, but at the same time you'll enjoy it.
Correct, sir.
That's
So,
how it is.
sir, my next question, in fact, relates to both of your answers. So now we have understood what attracted you most about the transactional side of the law, and I think you also talked about the range of a lawyer, how it increases when you enter that side of the law, because you're doing corporate advisory, you're reading up on new laws, you're working on transactions, so you're drafting and analyzing agreements as well. Now, sir, my next question relates to the journey of a transaction. So if you look at a, let's say, a very traditional M&A deal, where does it all begin? And when do the lawyers get involved? And what is the major role that they play?
I think this is a very excellent question, especially for if I answer, I'll try to answer it in as simple words I can, because this would be
Right,
very
sir.
important from someone who has just graduated, or
Right,
who's
sir.
still in his or her law school, and who just
Right,
wants
sir.
to test his or her waters and see whether they want to pursue corporate law or not. So if I give you example
Right,
of a
sir.
very simple typical share acquisition, okay, I'll
Right,
make
sir.
it very simple. Let's say it's just 100% acquisition. It's a private company, not in
Right,
a
sir.
listed, because in listed company there
Right,
are
sir.
other factors also.
Correct, sir.
Simple private company, 100% acquisition, and obviously it would depend upon which side you're representing. You could be either representing the acquirer,
Right, sir.
or put the in primary investment and the investor, or you can represent the company,
Correct,
right?
sir.
Or
Correct.
anyone whose shares are being acquired, right?
Right, sir.
So let's say if it's a share acquisition deal, if you're representing the acquirer, it'll start with a due diligence process,
Okay,
right?
sir.
Basically a due diligence would mean that it's as simple as that. In I'm sure in uh, uh, in law school you would have read about a caveat emptor, buyer
Right,
be
sir.
aware, right? You would have
Right,
read
sir.
about it, that if you're buying
Correct,
something,
sir.
it's your responsibility, right?
Right, sir.
Consumer Protection Act. uh,
Right,
this
sir.
concept flows from the Consumer Protection Act, if I'm not wrong. So
Right,
you
sir.
have to be aware about what you're buying. You're buying it. Like for example, if you go
Right,
to
sir.
a car shop, you want to buy a car. It's a second hand,
Right, sir.
not a car shop. If you're doing a second hand car purchase, you'll obviously want to
Right.
physically verify how it is, whether there's a dent,
Right, sir.
you want to get
Right,
it
sir.
fixed, or you want to pay less. So
Right, sir.
I'm putting in very simple words. So this is a due diligence exercise,
Okay, sir.
right? So from our
Correct.
perspective, if I'm representing the acquirer, I would be involved in the due diligence. We'll
Right,
prepare
sir.
a report, which is basically a due diligence report. So
Okay, sir.
if it's a company, it's a basic health checkup of a company, right?
Okay, sir.
You'll identify
Right, sir.
how the company is doing, and by identifying how the company is doing, I'm not in a legal due diligence. It is less of a identification of like I am not identifying how well the company is doing, as opposed to
Right, sir.
identification of issues. Like for example, if you get to know that the company is into some sector and some as per the FDI norms, let's say,
Right,
or
sir.
forget about FDI norms, under Indian law itself, some license is required, which is key to the
Right,
operation
sir.
of the business of that company, right? And while you're reading through the licenses of the company, you see that the license has expired. Would you want
Correct,
to
sir.
invest in a? Would you want to acquire a company which has an expired license? You would not, right?
No, sir. Right, sir.
Or forget about expired. This is still, let's say expiry is also a small point. It can be renewed, right? let's
Right, sir.
say let's say in the financials, in the annual report, you get to know that there is some litigation going on, and that
Right, sir.
litigation, and you further dig deep into it, and you get to know that it can lead to a potential outflow of 100 crore rupees from the company.
Correct, sir.
You would think twice about investing in the company, right? So there are
Investing.
different
Right.
chapters which we draft in a legal due diligence report. It could be, it is corporate chapter, then litigation chapter, indirectness chapter, consents chapter. Let's say the company has entered into a supply agreement,
Correct,
any
sir.
XYZ agreement, and pursuant, and the counterparty under that agreement, there's a term which specifies that in case the company is
Right, sir.
undergoing a change in control, you have to take consent of the counterparty, right?
Correct, sir.
If you take, and if you don't take consent, then it would lead to a termination of that contract. And let's say it's a very key
Right, sir.
contract. Obviously, it's very
Right, sir.
important to identify those key issues, right? You'll have to identify under
Right,
which
sir.
contract the target company needs consent for this proposed transaction. And obviously,
Right, sir.
100% acquisition would lead to change in control. If I'm acquiring your
Correct,
company,
sir.
okay, you own a company, you're a shareholder, you
Right,
are the
sir.
majority shareholder, and your friend also is owning 50% stake you're owning, right? If I'm
Right, sir.
acquiring, if I'm a, let's say I'm a company based in Germany, I'm acquiring your company, right?
Right, sir.
Obviously, number one, I would acquire shares from all of you. I'll appoint a nominee, because in a private company, there can't be just one shareholder. Like I can't, under Indian
Correct,
laws,
sir.
I can't just acquire and be a sole shareholder. I'll have to appoint one nominee also. Obviously, if I'm acquiring your company, I wouldn't want both the directors, right?
Right,
I
sir.
want guys to be the directors. I may have you for
Right,
some
sir.
period of or transition phase, but I would there would be a change in board composition also. So
Correct,
in
sir.
every contract or a due diligence, sorry, I'm going into detail, but this is just to make you
Right, sir.
understand, whoever who's listening, that why is it important. It's not just a
Right, sir.
simple health checkup. Also, certain key issues which are identified go into the documentation, right?
Right,
So
sir.
this is due diligence. You do this health, and one more thing, there are two buckets.
Right, sir.
Since I'm trying to
Right.
simplify, see, there are key issues, some certain key issues which are so critical that you wouldn't want
Right.
to do the deal altogether. Like going back to our
Okay, sir.
example of car, if there's a
Right,
minor
sir.
dent, you'll get it repaired. Would you say that
Right,
no,
sir.
no, no, I don't want to buy it at all, unless you are so,
No.
like, basically the availability in the market, in the secondary market, is so much that you wouldn't even want to spend a thought in getting it fixed, or asking the
Right, sir.
seller to fix it, and you may go to someone else buy it. If that is not
Right,
the
sir.
case, then you may feel that, see, this is a very minor issue. I can get it fixed, or I can ask the guy to get it fixed and buy it. I'm
Right,
getting it
sir.
at a good rate. Either it could
Right,
be
sir.
this one issue is this minor one.
Right.
Other could be, there could be a situation wherein the engine is such that you got a
Right.
mechanic, you brought a mechanic with yourself. Mechanic is the law firm. Okay, mechanic is
Right,
the
sir.
law firm. That law firm did a
Right.
due diligence. The mechanic did a due diligence on the company, and he found out that,
Right.
look, the engine is in a very bad shape, and you can't just
Right.
replace the engine. That'll be too cost ineffective. Like that won't be cost
Right.
effective, right?
Right, sir.
And you may decide to just sort of not go ahead with the deal, right? There could be two
Right, sir.
situations.
Right.
So
Right,
one
sir.
situation would be a lawyer identifying an issue which is so critical, some license which was
Right,
so important, the company is not obtained it. That is,
right, sir.
this license, a company not having license, is a case wherein the engine is in a very bad shape.
Right, sir.
Other, and you will not do the deal altogether. Then, as opposed to
Right,
situation wherein there is a minor dent. Now, a minor dent, the mechanic identifying the minor dent would be lawyer identifying a issue which is just a consent requirement under some contract, or
correct, sir.
maybe some minor non-compliance, like some not a very key registration, but some license has expired which has to be renewed, or some maybe some
Right, sir.
corporate non-compliance. Let's say some statutory register is not updated. Let's say in the company you are a shareholder, your friend is a shareholder, but your
Right,
names
sir.
are not updated in the register members, or let's say some details are were missing, or whatever, or the company gave some
Right, sir.
ESOPs to employees, register is not capturing those details. It's a
Correct,
minor
sir.
this thing. Not as if the company will shut, or the acquirer will face huge losses if, let's say, a year down the lane, MCA or the ROC comes with a show cause notice to the company, because
Correct, sir.
the acquirer will be in control. You would take your money and you will go away, right?
Right,
So
right,
from
sir.
that perspective, if there's a minor glitch that can be fixed, that dent thing. Now dent thing can be fixed in two ways. If you think it's something very, very minor, you can either say that, look, before I buy, you get it fixed.
Right, sir.
So if let's say there's a statutory register which is not updated, I tell you that, look, Shashwat, you get it updated before I buy. So that will be a
Right, sir.
condition precedent. So that will be
Correct.
built in a document. So for a
Right, sir.
share purchase agreement, for a share acquisition, 100%,
Right, sir.
सबसे पहले we did due diligence, then comes the
Right, sir.
documentation. If you
Right,
buy,
sir.
if you're buying a car, or if you're buying a house, okay,
Right,
you'll
sir.
there'll be some documentation, right? Sorry, I'm giving a very
Correct.
layman example, it's very simple. So if you're buying
Right.
shares, you
Right.
will enter into an agreement. It can't be just oral, right, based on good faith.
Right,
That's
sir.
not typically how you would want to do it. So for
Right, sir.
documenting the rights and obligations of parties under this agreement, under this transaction, you will execute a
Right, sir.
share purchase agreement. Okay,
Right, sir.
so this is documentation. And to answer your broad question, because since it was not limited to a share purchase deal, any basic
Right.
M&A transaction, if it's related to share acquisition investment, would start with a
Right,
due
sir.
diligence, and then would come the
Documentation.
documentation phase. Yes, so in this
Right, sir.
case, there would be a share purchase acquisition. Had it been an investment, let's say, had
Right,
I
sir.
been investing, let's say, 40 CR in your company for a
Right, sir.
15% stake, then there won't be any SPA. If it's a primary
Right.
investment, there would be a subscription agreement because I would
Correct,
be
sir.
subscribing to the share as opposed to
Correct, sir.
purchasing. Okay, so there would be
Correct,
share
sir.
subscription agreement. I will become
Correct.
shareholder, but I am not in control of the company. Who would control the company?
Right.
How would be how would it be governed? There could be a conflict
Correct,
between
sir.
us, right? Because
Correct,
you
sir.
already have board seats. You and your friend are sitting on the board. I
Right, sir.
invested 20% stake, right?
Correct, sir.
So for that, I would execute a shareholders agreement. To put it in simple
Got
words,
it, sir.
shareholders
Right,
agreement
sir.
would inter se govern the rights and obligations of the parties or of the shareholders, right?
Correct.
How a company would be governed, how many directors would be there, how a board meeting would be held, what would happen if you want to transfer your shares, if let's
Right,
say
sir.
you are what would happen if I want to transfer my shares. Can I
Right, sir.
transfer to a competitor? Would I let you? I am coming with 30%. Do you want me to
Right, sir.
uh, let me or my affiliate transfer my shares to a competitor? You may not want, right?
Correct,
Because
sir.
you have
Right.
spent your hard work, your energy in building this company, scaling it to this level. You wouldn't want a competitor to sit in the cap table. I may also not want
Right,
it.
sir.
So those discussions. If
Right,
I
sir.
want to purchase shares, if I want to, let's say, sell my shares, should I first offer to you?
Right, sir.
Do you want a
Right
ROFR?
of
Do you
first
want
refusal.
these are yeah,
Right.
you're aware of this.
Right.
So do you want that
Right, sir.
sorry, I'm not using these technical jargon so that to keep it simple.
Correct, sir.
Do you want that to happen? If I am getting if
Right,
I
sir.
am, let's say, someone is buying me out, do you also want to get tagged? That is a tag along,
Co-
right?
Correct, sir.
Then
Right.
do I want an exit from the company? Right. So all
Right,
that
sir.
that governed in the if a new issuance is happening, company wants to raise money, Do you want some third guy to
Correct.
come in and dilute you further? By dilution, I mean, obviously, if three shareholders are holding XYZ stake, if a fourth guy comes, your
Right,
pro
sir.
rata percentage would be like the
Value.
percentage would be
Right.
diluted, right?
Correct, sir.
Do you want that to happen? Do you want a preemption right? Obviously, you would want it. The investor would want in case of fresh issuance, the investor would want a pro rata right to subscribe to the issuance, right? These are commercial, and person to that, a shareholders agreement would be drafted. So in any
Correct, sir.
M&A deal, and obviously, see the documentation, the diligence, the kind of diligence that is happening, it will all depend on the kind of deal which is there, right?
Right,
I
sir.
am giving you example of one of
Correct.
the deals because M&A is a very broad this thing. Like
Correct, sir.
you gave example of that SPAC. It is something very
Right.
new, but still,
Right.
it's not as if only XYZ agreement would be executed for a SPAC transaction, right?
Right,
Only
sir.
a one agreement would. So I'm giving just a broad overview. So number one would
Right, sir.
be identifying issues in a due diligence, then documentation,
Right,
then
sir.
and in this typical transaction, that dent fixing example which I gave, you would ask
Right,
him
sir.
to fix the dent cost,
Right, sir.
right? Then dent fixing would be a condition precedent. Like before the
Right, sir.
transaction closes, before I pump in money or acquire your shares, you would want to,
Right, sir.
you have to get it fixed. That is your responsibility. That will be
Right,
a
sir.
CP, condition precedent, and
Okay,
then
sir.
closing happens.
Okay.
And let's say it was a transaction wherein you were there, your
Hmm.
friend is there, primary investment was there, and one more thing. See, there could be some issues. Let's say you want to purchase the car in a hurry, right?
Right,
You
sir.
want to purchase the car in a hurry. He's saying that, look, I won't be able to get the dent fixed. I'm not here. I'm traveling abroad. The seller says the car
Right,
is
sir.
with my friend. I can get it fixed later after 2 months. And you say,
Right,
okay,
sir.
ठीक है, till the time you agree, it's fine. Okay, so basically something which the owner or the promoter is you are agreeable to him doing post you pump in money or post the transaction. That will be a condition
Right,
subsequent.
sir.
Let's say you agree that
Correct, sir.
that register to is a very minor issue. Why
Yeah.
hold the transaction delayed because of a
Right.
minor non-compliance, which may be
Right,
overlooked
sir.
by the MP also, right?
Right, sir.
So that those cleanup can be done post the transaction. So
Correct,
that will
sir.
be a condition subsequent, right? So that will be
Okay, sir.
वो transaction के बाद होगा once the transaction has closed. So this is
Right, sir.
a very, I'm giving a very broad overview of how a basic acquisition deal would work. Now, coming
Right,
back
sir.
to your question, from the broader question that how a deal works. See,
Right, sir.
there are multiple parties in a big deal. It's not just the lawyers and the promoter or the company or the investor, right? In
Right, sir.
in a big deal, and especially when there are multiple stakeholders involved, there would be a tax angle to it, right?
Right, sir.
There would be not just legal DD. There could be
Right, sir.
a financial DD, just to check the
Right, sir.
financial well-being of the company, the performance of the company, how much revenue has the company
Right, sir.
generated, how much cash is it burning, because at the
Right,
end
sir.
of the day, it's a commercial transaction. You want to make money out of it. Post your
Correct, sir.
investment, either it's a strategic investment or you want to run the company as a JV partner. But in the end, you
Right, sir.
want the company to perform well, right? Otherwise, why will you invest? So from
Correct,
that
sir.
perspective, even the role of like let's say big four firms become
Right,
very
sir.
important. Especially
Correct.
they are also engaged in a lot of diligences, financial diligences. So that also becomes very, and at the same time, the tax consultants play a very role, because obviously you wouldn't want
Right, sir.
to execute a transaction and in the end realize that, that the transaction was structured in a way wherein the cash outflow uh, was a lot because of tax consideration. So that is how
Correct.
and our role, and obviously in big deals it's very important, very important to
Right, sir.
get the right players on board in the beginning itself. Like it shouldn't
Correct, sir.
happen that you structure in a transaction in a way on your own without realizing the nitty-gritties and the pros and the cons, and then lawyers
Right, sir.
on board. The ship has already sailed. Then in the end you realize that
Right,
okay,
sir.
I shouldn't have done it that way. So this
Right,
is
sir.
how M&A transaction typically works, and I give you just a minor like glimpse of a typical share purchase deal or
Right,
investment.
sir.
Like basically And there's a difference. I'm sure anyone who's listening will understand and appreciate that in case of a share purchase, there's a secondary sale happening, and in case of a subscription, there's a primary infusion of money. So there's a difference,
Correct, sir. Correct, sir.
and the
So,
documentation involved is also different.
right,
There
sir.
can't be one
So,
like you can't have templates for any M&A transaction. You can
correct,
take
sir.
up some good clauses, tweak them, but there can't be no templates. Someone who's especially who has just started working, and something which I realized few months, which after working maybe it would have been better which if I would have understood it in the beginning, is that whenever
Right, sir.
you're working on a M&A deal, and if you're a junior, you're doing the first cut of the document, you're preparing
Right, sir.
let's say a share purchase agreement, and obviously you can't just start typing, you can't just google a share purchase agreement and get a template. You will get a very short
Right,
date
sir.
draft, which may not be
Correct, sir.
pertaining to Indian jurisdiction, right? So
Correct, sir.
obviously you'll go to a senior for a draft.
Right, sir.
That senior
Right,
will
sir.
give you a draft, and you will work on that draft. Maybe you will have 2 3 precedents, and you will work on that draft depending on the term
Right, sir.
sheet. Basically,
Correct,
again,
sir.
sorry, before a transaction is contemplated, parties often execute a term sheet. Okay,
Right,
term
sir.
sheet is gives a glimpse of the rights and obligations which the parties will have, because
Right,
parties
sir.
sometimes feel that, look, if we just give the draft to the lawyers and let them do the draft. So during a term M&A transaction, often before the parties formally execute any document, they execute a term sheet. So the reason for execution of term sheet is that parties want to first document that what would be the key rights and obligations of both the parties at the in any transaction, and what will be formally documented in a transaction document, because they don't want to sort of delay this negotiation process because they haven't agreed to anything, right?
Correct, sir.
So if there is any specific angle to the transaction which is very key, or they want to make sure that parties are, like, let's say parties are into negotiation, right? There's an investor
Right, sir.
who's keen on investing. You would want to sort of protect that discussion, right? You would want to execute some key discussions which you have finally agreed at even before the
Right, sir.
diligence has started, or if the diligence has just started. You would want to formulate in form of a 2 pager or a 10 pager, depending on how the transaction is structured, and you would want to, let's say, write that this term sheet is exclusive for 60 days,
Correct, sir.
right? You may want to sort of at least have some formal discussions, and basis that discussion, begin with the diligence or begin with the documentation, just to make sure that the
Right, sir.
transaction is not unnecessarily delayed. So that is the importance of a term sheet, right? So
Okay, sir.
this is how, yeah. So this is and yeah, so I was coming back to a discussion that something very important which I could think, that as a junior lawyer, if you're working on any draft, if you're either reviewing, marking up, right, or if you are drafting from the first cut itself, and if you're relying on precedents, always take the first cut of the documentation which was uh, the other. To put it in simple words, let's say
Right,
I
sir.
prepare a share sheet, okay,
Right, sir.
or let's say I prepare a shareholders agreement, because chances of a markup, and by markup I mean the other side marking up the document to ensure that rights are protected, his client's rights.
Right, sir.
So to put it in simple words, so if you send a shareholders agreement, obviously the other side will mark it up, then you will again
Right,
mark
sir.
it up. So 2 3 rounds of markup negotiations, right?
Right, sir.
This also
Right,
happens,
sir.
like put it, and while answering your question, I'm sort of putting all this in perspective. DD
Right, sir.
happened, transaction documents were there, negotiations happen, one lawyer sends to the
Right,
other
sir.
side. First, you can't just send it to the other side, you'll first send to your client will give in
Right,
inputs.
sir.
After that you will
Right, sir.
revise, you will make sure that everything is captured, then to send to the other side will send to their party after markup, then they will send to us, we'll discuss internally,
Right,
then
sir.
basis input from my client, I'll again revise it, again send to the other
Right,
side.
sir.
So depending on the nature of transaction, depending upon how fast parties want to close, all this is done. So if you are doing it for the first time, this is where what I'm answering. So let's say we send one cut to the other side, the other side marks up, we mark up. Eventually,
Right,
then
sir.
we prepare execution versions and it gets signed. final version. Now
Right.
some junior comes up to me, or some junior,
Right,
you're
sir.
coming, you're joined cam, or and you want ki, I want to Akshay, I want a investor friendly uh, shareholders agreement. I have to mark up or I have to prepare wherein 30% stake investor is putting in. I say, Arif Ashwat, I have a draft ready. At least you'll get some background. So I shouldn't give, and it's obviously unless you're asking me, I may not think, and I may just give you the execution version. You should specifically say that Akshay, don't give me the execution version. Give me the first cut of the document which was sent to the other side or the client. Reason being that the final version which is prepared, it is a negotiated document. A lot of my asks would have been already shot down. A lot of their points would have been deleted. But the first cut which would have been prepared and sent to the client or the other side, you would have tried best to prepare I would have tried my best to prepare, to put in my best foot forward, right? I would have tried to document the rights of my client in the best possible way, right? So from that perspective, whenever you're, it's a very simple, like very important, because sometimes some senior may forget to tell you this. You get a draft from somewhere and that senior will just ask you, kahan se ye liya? Acha, was it final version? You'll say, nahi, mere, matlab, was it the first cut or the final version? You'll say, ki, I don't know. So that shouldn't happen. It's a very simple, like a very small point, but in the initial stage, if you realize this, it'll be better. So always rely on the
Correct, sir.
first cut of the documentation and check. And okay, and whenever you're looking for precedents, you should know that which side are you on. If you're
Correct,
representing
sir.
the investor, and if you're looking for precedent, you should tell that person that I want an investor friendly draft. You can't
Right,
just
sir.
have any SHA which is pro company. That
Right,
won't be
sir.
the case if I've told someone or whatever, any transaction document. So why I'm telling you this, that while you're marking up also, it's not as if you'll just mark up basis one precedent. If it's a let's say a information right clause, I can tell you it can be different. Let's say I'm the investor. I am investing
Right,
in
sir.
your company. You have been the promoter. I'm investing. I would
Right, sir.
want you to give me certain information about the function of the company because I'm a 20% shareholder. You'll still be in charge of the
Right, sir.
company, but I have invested in
Right,
you,
sir.
right? I would want some information. I would want certain reports. I would
Right,
say
sir.
that you give me a quarterly report of your progress. You give me a monthly MIS. You give me
Right, sir.
any information which I feel like asking. You give
Right, sir.
me any information about any litigation. If you or your employee is a party to any litigation,
Right, sir.
maybe I'm the investor counsel. My investor has said that I want all kind of information, and even include a catch-all provision that any other information which the investor feels like asking, right?
Right, sir.
I may put it this way. Now, if you are, let's say, Ashwat, representing the company counsel, you will flag it to your client because
Right, sir.
obviously these days clients are very smart. There are so many, like often there's a situation wherein they may catch something which maybe we may not have thought about it from a commercial perspective, but
Correct,
you
sir.
can't just think that they will be able to flag everything to you. You also have to you have to wear that commercial hat.
Right, sir.
You may think that ये तो standard clause है यार, इसमें क्या, what I have to, but from a company counsel, company
Right, sir.
counsel point of view, you may want to flag that, okay, let's say you are representing your friend who's the owner of this company wherein I'm investing 20%. I'm representing a client
Right,
who's
sir.
investing 20%. You may flag it out that, see, please see that they are asking for any information which they feel like.
Correct,
Won't
sir.
it be a logistical issue? Can you prepare,
Right, sir.
can you keep on sending them these reports? So
Right,
there
sir.
are, you can't blindly mark up a document. Let's say you're
Right.
representing the company and you're preparing a SHA and you find a draft जिसमें बहुत सारे information rights हैं and
Right,
तुमने
sir.
वो copy paste कर दिया without applying your mind. That is wrong, right?
Right,
Because
sir.
eventually you are sort of not protecting the rights of your client. You are representing the company, but you are making it burdensome on the company.
Right, sir.
So every word which you write, you have to think it that it is in interest of my client or the other side, especially from
Right.
precedent. And this I'm saying, obviously, someone having 5 years experience or 10 years experience may think that, अरे ये क्या point है, ऐसे कोई थोड़े बेचता है draft. It is such a minor point.
Right.
But from a A0 point of view, people make mistakes. I have done it.
Correct, sir.
Everyone does. I don't think there's
Correct, sir.
anyone unless some prodigy kid who knows everything, that's a different thing. That may be the case, but
Right.
everyone makes these mistakes, not realizing that
Correct.
XY is not in my favor. So this was on how
Right, sir.
a transaction pans out. So DD, then transaction, then term sheet may be executed. Then you have these transaction documents. There could be tax advisors involved, and
Right, sir.
eventually it all culminates into signing. After signing, there would be list of conditions precedent, that dent fixing
Right, sir.
thing,
Right, sir.
right? Or
Correct.
there could be some post closing adjustment that okay, I'll pay you
Correct.
XYZ amount right now, and out
Right,
of
sir.
this, I'll pay you later. When
Right, sir.
signing happens, closing happens, and then um, you have to fulfill those conditions subsequent also. The
Right,
company
sir.
has to do it, typical share purchase deal.
Right.
But again, this is a very there's no way to answer that what are the various stages, because it all depends on the kind of transaction, the nature of transaction. If
Correct,
it's
sir.
some other deal, uh, there could be other documents involved. But yes, in a
Very true,
typical
sir.
share purchase or an investment, this is how it would be.
Very true, sir. And like that was quite a holistic, look into the life cycle of a transaction, I think, and that would explain it well to the students and the young lawyers who are just starting out. And I think that bridging of gap that we were talking about earlier in the conversation would happen because they would get an insight into the life of a lawyer as well. And I think from what I can get from your answer, the lawyer has to play a role in every part of that transaction, and not just as a legal advisor, as you rightly mentioned, they have to wear the commercial hat, understand the implications on business, on the industries, and everything. So, thank you,
Exactly.
sir. Now, moving on to the substantive aspects a bit, sir. We have been talking about SPACs, that is special purpose acquisition companies. There's a lot of talk going on around it. So, first of all, sir, in very simple terms, can you explain what an SPAC is and their utility, and what are the regulatory challenges that they face today?
Yeah. So see, personally, I've not been a part of any SPAC transaction, but obviously, these SPAC transactions and in from India perspective, it is fairly new. If I'm sure you must be knowing that last year, I think sometime in July or August, Renew
Right.
uh,
Renewal, yes, sir.
closed the first. I think that was the first one, if I'm not wrong.
Correct,
And
sir.
post that, I'm
That
not
was
sure
the
whether
first.
anything in SPAC this thing has happened in India. I'm not sure if something has been
Right, sir.
reported. I'm not aware. So this SPAC structure has surfaced very recently, and it's very good that
Right.
you pointed out. So basically, to put it, I'll give you a very simple explanation of how what a SPAC is, so that someone who has no understanding also, who's in law school or the first year of their journey as a lawyer, will also understand. So
Right, sir.
initial public offering, to everyone is aware that how a company raises
Right, sir.
capital, right? How a company
Right, sir.
raises a special purpose acquisition company. The whole purpose of formation of this company is for a IPO. So these companies go
Okay,
for
sir.
IPO, raise funds, and they raise funds for a specific purpose. The
Correct,
specific
sir.
purpose is acquisition of other companies, and mind you, this a SPAC would be a shell company. It won't have
Okay,
any
sir.
operation, and obviously, whatever I may say, this structure is still sort of evolving, and it still has to it's still testing its waters, and we have to see that how. And but still, from first, let me explain. Sorry, I won't digress. So
Right, sir.
SPAC is basically a company which is going into an IPO, raising funds with the primary
Right, sir.
purpose of acquisition or a business combination with a target entity.
Got
Okay.
it, sir.
Now you would say
Right, sir.
that SPAC ka to we don't have anything in India yet. It's fairly new. That so what exactly it is that would interest
Right.
an Indian company,
Right,
right?
sir.
So from a very preliminary understanding, exit would be something which would be viable for an Indian company in this SPAC structure. You would say how?
Okay, sir.
So in many of these US listed SPACs, okay,
Right,
the
sir.
Indian company would be a viable target.
Right,
Like
sir.
taking you back to that discussion which I said that they would acquire. So from an
Right,
exit
sir.
point of view, this is where we are in a SPAC structure. Now coming to
Right, sir.
regulatory bit, I don't know whether there were any regulatory challenges faced in that Renew deal, uh, since I was
Right,
not
sir.
part of it, and the SPAC structure is very new. But
Right,
something
sir.
which I am very aware of is that it is not a very simple structure. It's a very
Right, sir.
complicated structure wherein,
Right, sir.
again, and obviously this would apply to any M&A deal, but specifically in this SPAC transaction, it's not just M&A, but it is
Right, sir.
M&A plus general corporate work plus cap marks work plus lot of tax related
Tax related.
aspects,
Yes, sir.
and adding on to
Right,
that
sir.
even the exchange regulations,
Correct, sir.
foreign exchange regulations, because uh, from so when it comes to SPAC transaction, in my personal opinion, how the regulator will review, and how and I am very very sure that going forward the regulator will be very carefully scrutinizing the foreign exchange aspect as well as the disclosure norms,
Right,
just
sir.
to make sure that amidst all this structure, there's no foreign exchange regulation which is being violated. But this is
Correct,
something which
sir.
is still going, and we'll have to see that how it pans out. And obviously, once I also get to specifically work on a SPAC transaction, even then, only then I
Right,
would
sir.
be able to sort of tell you that exactly what are those regulatory challenges which these
Right,
deals
sir.
are facing or may face in India. But again,
Right,
uh,
sir.
I have been, since I'm working with a firm. Uh, I
Right,
have
sir.
heard about these transactions surfacing at a very like skyrocketing rate
Correct, sir.
in these 2 years. I think in
Right, sir.
pandemic phase itself, especially in US.
Right, sir. Right,
Like
sir.
I had heard about PAX, I think 2 3 years back also. Let's say in
Right, sir.
2016 or 18. But suddenly in
Right, sir.
2020 21, they like it's as if it was hidden somewhere, and this has surfaced. So
Right, sir.
that's where we are right now. And let's see, since
Right,
one
sir.
transaction has closed, and again I'm caveating it by saying that I'm not aware. There could be situation wherein some other transaction would have also closed. But in
Right,
my
sir.
limited knowledge, I remember last year this renewed transaction,
Correct,
SPAC
sir.
transaction has closed. But post
Right, sir.
that, I'm not very sure. And there
Right,
could
sir.
be a situation wherein in recent times we'll definitely get to read about these transactions. And even though I've not been a part of any SPAC deal, but
Right, sir.
from an exit perspective, I have had exit clauses wherein we
Right,
have
sir.
prescribed DSPAC as a
Right, sir.
exit option. Now you would say, what is
Okay, sir.
DSPAC? So basically,
Right,
a
sir.
business combination leg which is happening in the end,
Right, sir.
that is a DSPAC. So basically, a SPAC
Okay, sir.
transaction ultimately converts culminates into a DSPAC. So DSPAC as a exit mechanism, we have been prescribing in transaction documents.
Right, sir. So I think so. The regulatory challenge can be linked to the very simple reason that anything new presents a regulatory challenge because the structure is new. The regulators want to have their heads around it, and as you mentioned, there are a lot of components involved. There's company law, there's taxation
And just
aspects,
one thing
there's
I would
FEMA
want to
aspects.
point out, one thing I want to
Right, sir.
point out, since I mentioned it earlier also, especially since it's a very complex structure, and a lot has been talked about it, but we are yet to see how it pans out in India, and how the regulator sees it. Uh,
Right,
it is
sir.
very important to get the right kind of players on board in the beginning itself. As I mentioned, in
Right,
any
sir.
M&A, it's very very important so that you get a holistic view as to what would happen, how would it happen, just to ensure that there is no slippage in the cracks. This is something very
Correct,
very
sir.
important.
Right, sir. With that, sir, I'll move on to my last question. And my last question will have two parts, sir. So 2021 witnessed, I think, the highest number of deals in the last few years. M&A was an unprecedented high. There were a lot of first-time buyers as well, sir, as the data suggests. So, sir, according to you, whatever experience you've had as a corporate lawyer, what was the reason behind such an unprecedented growth of transactions in 2021 in particular? And secondly, sir, how has it impacted, if at all it has impacted your life as a lawyer? How these unprecedented number of deals, how has it impacted you as a lawyer?
Yeah. So when this COVID stuck, this pandemic stuck, I think it was in 2020, sometime March, when our offices
Right,
got
sir.
shut. Okay,
Right, sir.
and we were in the middle of a transaction. So back then, I had this strong feeling that suddenly there'll be no work at all. There will be no
Right,
work
sir.
at all for like say 5, 3, 4 months because everything is going to get shut. But I was like, totally like I kept on waiting for that period that maybe they would be again
Right,
a lawyer. I shouldn't say this, that I
right,
kept
sir.
on waiting that okay there would be some break maybe for a week. There would be some I might be doing just corporate advisory or there wouldn't be any transactional work at all. But that never happened. Never happened.
Right, sir.
And obviously that is linked to your question that there was a sudden surge in M&A transaction, and it was really unprecedented, at least in my
Right,
understanding. I think there are, I would just say that there are two reasons for it. Number two, I feel that abundance of capital available and
right,
that
sir.
hunger in entrepreneurs and the
Right, sir.
investors to grow more and more. And
Right, sir.
you have to appreciate that, considering that the M&A space uh, went like witnessed a massive surge, and there was so
Right, sir.
many M&A deals which were not just executed but closed also. You will have to see how resilient our economy is. You'll have to appreciate this fact, that how
Correct, sir.
resilient our economy is, how like uh, it totally surprised me that I
Right,
was
sir.
expecting at least when the lockdown happens it will slow down, but that never
Right,
happened.
sir.
So there could be just two reasons in my understanding. That
Right,
number one I pointed out the hunger to grow
right, sir.
and tapping the right opportunities, believing in the
Right, sir.
economy. And if you
Right, sir.
talk about M&A deals, it's not just the domestic M&As. There were a lot of
Right,
we
sir.
even lot of foreign investments happening in and since I was part of uh, a lot of M&A activity, it's not as if the
Right, sir.
uh, cross-border M&A sort of halted. So you'll have to
Right, sir.
understand that it's not just about the economy, like basically the economy being affected or not doing well or not being affected or whatever, but you'll have to understand that how
Right.
much faith do the investors have in the Indian economy and the resilience of
Correct, sir.
the Indian economy as a whole, coupled with the fact that there are entrepreneurs who are so resilient and they want to, and even investors who have faith in the economy. They have hunger to grow,
Right, sir. Correct.
plus the availability of abundance capital. As a lawyer, these are the, I think, 2, 3 key points which come to my mind whenever I ponder over the fact that how come there was so much work in this pandemic. Now coming to the latter part of your question, that whether how did it affect our lives. So see,
Right.
earlier what used to happen, and this is sort of a this is my personal experience. It could vary. Earlier, uh, they like when we were working from office. Uh,
Right, sir.
we specifically had at least some sort of a cutoff time, that okay,
Right, sir.
we can't expect something to happen at this stage, right? It's done. Like
Right, sir.
even there, like if you're doing cross jurisdictional work, it happens.
Right.
You'll have to take calls at 11 in the night, because there in US it might be morning, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, early
Right,
morning.
sir.
So that
Right, sir.
happens. But still there used to be a cutoff time. What with pandemic, what happened is that since everyone was at home, basically that thing to some extent got diluted. But
Correct, sir.
again, someone may crib about it, but I'm not someone who would crib about it. Like for some time, obviously, if you're tired, you may feel that okay, now it's getting too much. But for a
Right.
lawyer who has just started his or her journey, this
Right, sir.
these 2, 3 years are very important, very crucial, because there is no other way
Correct,
to
sir.
learn. You'll have
Right,
to
sir.
swim and then learn. You can't watch a
Correct, sir.
YouTube video on how to swim in 3 easy steps and
Right,
learn to
sir.
swim, right?
Correct,
It's
sir.
only always the hard way, the way you learn it. So from some, and obviously 2 years down the lane, I was not even an essay, right? I had four
Right,
years
sir.
of experience, 3 years, 4 years
Right, sir.
experience. So for me also, it was an excellent opportunity. So
Right,
rather than
sir.
sitting and complaining that I have too much work, I think that's not how you should see it. Maybe again, I'm not, again, it's my personal experience, my personal views, nothing related to any, it's just my pure personal opinion, that especially for a
Right.
beginner, you can't have a you can't have a very comfortable uh, working work life balance, and learn
Right, sir.
and you may end up learning a lot in 2 years. Again,
Correct, sir.
someone may see and criticize me ki, "Yeah, this is so toxic," but this is a fact. This is
Correct,
how
sir.
you will learn, especially in those, like, at least the formative years. I have, like, everyone should learn it the hard way. And by and I'm
Right, sir.
saying, and I'm what I'm saying meaning is that there should be abundance of work. I'm not saying that the work environment should be toxic. I would be the last
Right,
person
sir.
who would say, but
Right, sir.
never crib about there being a lot of work, especially in the initial years. And there is
Correct, sir.
and one more thing, I don't know why, but there is this notion that corporate lawyers are always dying with work, and
Right, sir.
they should, like, you should think thrice before joining corporate law firm, because you have to work for like 16 hours a day. You have to sleep and work. But
Right, sir.
I'm being very honest with you. If you are a fresher, if you join a litigator's chamber also, you don't even
Right, sir.
get Sundays.
Right,
So
sir.
how, not as if only corporate lawyers are working very hard, or everyone who
Right, sir.
joins as a fresher for initial few years has to work hard. There is
Right, sir.
no second thoughts about it. Everyone has to do, and there's nothing special about it. You have to
Right,
do
sir.
it, as simple as that.
Right, sir.
There's no other way. So in pandemic also, yes, there were times when this mixing of, because obviously everyone is at home, anyone can call you anytime. But
Right,
as a
sir.
corporate law, maybe for us, or at least for me, it was, maybe it was easier because I had got used to it much before
Right,
that.
sir.
So that's how it was. But yes, it has been a very, and I was someone, and again, my personal experience, this is my personal uh, experience. I was someone who used to rush to the office for anything. Let's say it's a
Right, sir.
Saturday, I have 1 hour work. I have my laptop. I can work from home. I used to rush to the office, work for an hour, and then come back, because
Right, sir.
I just couldn't work at home. It used to take me double the time.
Right.
But in the
Right, sir.
pandemic, we were just sort of stuck. There was no way out.
Right, sir.
So one good thing has happened is that, in fact, now I can work from home entirely. I don't feel the need to go to the office. But yes, some people again may criticize me for that. I am a strong advocate for people being in office,
Right,
not
sir.
at the cost of their health. But I feel that especially in the formative years, it is very important. You may not realize, but those soft skills which you learn being around people, being around that environment, that competitive environment, being around seniors, being around people who know much more than you, being around sharp people, those soft skills which you take up, you may not even realize,
Right, sir.
as opposed to being in
Right,
your
sir.
comfort zone, sitting at home. I'm not saying that during pandemic you just jump in office, but I'm a
Right,
strong
sir.
believer in the fact that if you're working from office, you're more efficient, and not just
Right, sir.
efficient in terms of skill building, especially for from
Correct, sir.
someone who's a junior. It'll be at a much faster pace.
Correct,
But
sir.
this is again my personal view. Someone may feel, maybe majority may feel that no, it's the same, you can just do something from home
Yeah.
also. But this is how I feel. Even though now I am
Right.
much more comfortable in working from home. I can, like, do anything from home. I don't feel the need to
Right, sir.
rush to the office. But yes, when offices reopen, I'll be more than happy to, I'm
Right, sir.
sort of waiting for the offices to open. Let's see how long will it take. Hopefully maybe mid Feb or
Right, sir.
March.
I think, sir, the very relevant point that you have pointed out is, how there's this, I think, a false distinction between only corporate lawyers working for 16, 17 hours a day. I'm someone who's very inclined towards litigation. In fact,
Hmm.
most of my internships and all have been in that area. And what I can tell from my experience, sir, is that Sundays are sometimes the busiest because there's new filings that are
Prepare.
happening on Monday and new matters
Exactly.
that come up on Monday. So sometimes the hardest for litigation lawyers. So, and I think for the 3, 4 years, as you've talked about, when you're building your foundation as a lawyer, and those 3, 4 years are very defining for your career as a lawyer. If you don't put in that amount of effort, don't make, I think there are certain necessary sacrifices in life which someone has to
And
make. And I
majority
think,
of the switches happen in that phase itself. Like, let's say
right, sir.
in 2016, if let's say in 2016, some tier one would have hired 60 people. In 4 years, 20 or 10 would be left, or maybe
Right,
lesser,
sir.
maybe
Right, sir.
10. I'm not sure. I think in my batch, um, like 90% would have left.
Right, sir. So I think that is quite true, sir. And with that, I think we've come to an end of this conversation. I I would just want to thank you, sir. This was very insightful, very detailed, And you have truly given us an insight into the life of a corporate lawyer, the life cycle of a transaction, and we have also spoken about some very interesting issues today, sir. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Shashwat. Best of luck.
Thank you, sir.